Okay, we're live. I am not sure if the participants will see us before 9 or not. The note said something different than what I understood, so we may just want to assume that people are in here with us.
Okay. Well, we will be able to see them, right? When the time comes.
Again,
Okay.
I haven't experienced this yet.
Okay.
So we will see.
All
Can
right.
you see me?
I can see you. Yes.
My photo.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same for attendees or not.
And I can see you in both like the session and backstage.
Oh, okay, you're logged in both ways?
It looks like it. Nothing changes really for me.
Okay.
Um,
I'm going to try that myself.
but
okay.
I guess if I'm backstage, if I have it clicked on backstage, maybe I'm not visible. I have to admit, I am not at all nervous about what I'm talking about. I am a little nervous about the technology.
Fair. I think we're good. From what I can tell is that nobody sees us yet. We have 2 minutes and 35 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, my husband was like, "Oh, you are so good on Zoom. This will be great for you." And I was like, but it's not Zoom.
Right?
It's a different format, which I know I cultivate and practice an online presence, but
Sure.
part of that is knowing your stuff and where you are.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and
So anything you need, if you want me to interrupt and let you know if there's questions or, if you want me to help with chat or anything like that, you just let me know.
yeah, if you notice something that I'm not noticing, please let me know.
Okay. And do you generally hold and do a Q&A at the end?
So, well, the format that I'm going to go with is I'm going to introduce myself and the center, and then do a little group intro with a question. And then we've got a little somatic practice, and then a presentation, which about this topic, and then a conversation discussion for the end.
Okay.
And that way we can take it wherever the group needs to go, or if there's specific questions or something of interest to us, we can just focus right on that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we are down to the last 30 seconds and going live soon. So I am going to mute myself, but you just call on me if you need anything. I will be welcoming everybody and encouraging introductions in the chat and dropping in the community agreements.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Thanks. Mhm. Hi, everybody. I'm Shireen. There's anybody out there? um, since this is the first time using this platform, I'm not sure if anyone can see me or if you all are with me. So if there's anybody here today, we see some attendees on the attendees list, but I'm not sure if anyone's in the room. So if you are, um, please drop a message in the chat and let us know what you see and how things are. Okay, there's some people here. Great. Can you all see each other? You can see me. Okay. I wish I could see you all. Okay, good. There's some people here. All right. If anybody knows, maybe I'm doing something wrong that makes it so that I can't see you all. You can't see each other either. All right. So it feels kind of like I'm on a stage by myself because I can't see anybody. So, which is an interesting, it's an interesting practice and presence, just knowing that you all are there. And I guess unless somebody else has some idea of maybe I have a button that I'm not pressing, I'd love to see you. But we can get started, and I guess we'll rely on chat if you have any questions or if anything becomes complicated. So thank you for coming and joining, well, all of us today, but me for this particular event. This is a topic that's really special to me and has become more special to me over the last year. So I will talk about that a little bit more in a second, but okay, we're just gonna be not visible or to speak. Okay. Well, that is difficult, but but we'll do our best. So my name is Shireen Cawley. I'm a National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. I have my Master's in Arts in Health and Wellness Coaching. So I know that's something kind of new, and a lot of people don't exactly understand what that is, but a National Board Certified Coach is someone who's been extensively trained in behavior change and change theory. And then we use, as a health and wellness coach, I use that training to facilitate people's own growth in their own direction. So I don't decide what people are going to do. They tell me what kind of changes they want to make in their lives. And I use like unconditional positive regard to ask them questions that it's hard to ask themselves or that they might not think of for themselves, and then help them find the barriers and strengths that need to be addressed in order to make lasting change in their lives. And so I came to that through my own practice of always asking questions and looking for solutions, and finding that a lot of what we were doing as individuals was mirroring what was happening in a collective way. And so I moved to Maine several years ago and started doing a second degree, which is through currently at the University of Maine, studying peace and reconciliation studies. My specific area of interest is the effects of hegemonic white patriarchy on spirituality and human development. So I combine both of those studies to facilitate collective change, and I do a lot of work with groups to figure out, like, okay, I see this world we want to live in. We all have a pretty good idea of like how nice that would be to get along better or to have greater equity and greater inclusion. However, we have a lot of barriers to make that happen. So my work is crafting ways around those barriers. And in doing that, I found Paul Weiss at the Whole Health Center. The Whole Health Center has been a health and wellness center serving their community for 40 years this year, which is amazing for a wellness center and a spiritual center. That's just practically, it's just really hard to find. So I came to them because I was actually looking for a mentor. And then in the end, not the end, in the middle, I'm now the associate director of the center, because a lot of Paul's work and my work is very complementary or matches up, where he's done the 40 years of study and I'm seeing where we are now and how we can combine those things. So that's how I came to be here and how I came to be talking about this topic. So I would love to know a little bit more about you all. I was kind of assuming I would get to see you. So my question was sort of not related to anything that we were talking about. But at the moment, I can only see your names and the pictures you've decided to share with me. So maybe for an introduction, if everybody could just let me know their names. I see your name, but if you're here with any particular organization, it'd be great to know what organization that was. And then my warm-up question for all of us was, what's some place that you would like to go that you've never been? But I'd also love to know where in Maine you are. So if we could just if everybody could answer that, where in Maine you are, if you're here with an organization or not, and where's someplace you would love to go that you've never been. And while you guys are answering those questions for me, and I appreciate that, it makes me feel a little closer to you, I will answer those questions for you. So I'm here with the Whole Health Center. I'm currently in Orland. The Whole Health Center is in Bar Harbor. So a lot of the work that I'm doing right now in the community is either on the Blue Hill Peninsula or MDI. However, a lot of our work at the moment, Paul's work and the Whole Health Center's work became more broad during the pandemic when he started opening up to Zoom. All of my work has always been remote. So that's something I've always been familiar with. So I have clients all over the country that I work with. And someplace I would like to go that I've never been is Iran, which is, I actually very specifically, my family has land there that I would really love to see what that feels like to stand on that land. So that's a little bit more about me related to this conference. Thanks for answering. So my I have a mixed heritage and kind of an ambiguous identity when it comes to racial identity. So my dad's from Iran. My mom is American. My dad's also American, but my mom has been American for generations. I grew up in Maryland, and that's a really very diverse area. But I grew up in a place called Columbia, which really prides itself on integration and diversity. And so the fact that I had this ambiguity to my heritage was kind of hidden from me because I grew up with my mom's family. And I grew up in a place where you weren't supposed to see color and you weren't supposed to talk about it. So it wasn't until I was an adult that I started to notice there was some conflict that I was experiencing. And I did some further exploration and research and started noticing that that my identity shifts a lot depending on the group of folks that I'm with. So, and what's happening in the world. So definitely growing up, people were always asking me where I was from, or, you know, and I would say, I'm from here in Colombia. I was born at this hospital, but that's not what they meant. And since the 2016 election, it's become a lot more obvious. My husband is white, and he tells me it's always obvious, and he's from the South. So he has taken me there and been like, I don't understand how you don't notice this. So it's really been an interesting experience for me, where I had to take in all these teachings that we're all working on together and really explore my own identity, and the experience that I was having as I interacted with other people who might not even be aware of how they perceive me differently. So, I'm reading a new book about Vietnam. I have a feeling when I'm done the book, I'm also going to really want to go there. So that's a little bit more about that, and that's why I would like to go to Iran. As an adult, I've done a lot more healing about my heritage and a lot more sharing about that. Which brings us to most of the topics that we're going to talk about today. And we're specifically going to talk about accountability. So requests for accountability as invitations for connection. And that's something that has come up socially quite a bit over the last year and a half or more. We saw it with the Me Too movement. We saw it a lot in the discussions, in the political discussions. And we see it specifically after the Capitol riots. We saw a lot of specific requests. We actually used that word, and people were saying that they wanted accountability there. But there's also a lot of subtle ways that we are requesting accountability, both socially and in our interpersonal relationships, that we might not necessarily recognize as requests, but they are great invitations. Some of them that are a little bit more volatile and talked about are things like cancel culture. And at the end, after I share a bunch with you guys, we're going to have a discussion that's completely open, so we can talk about whatever aspects of accountability are most valuable to our conversation right now. And I guess we're going to do that through the chat. Yeah, but there are some more subtle ways that we give invitations and requests for accountability, and they're a little harder to recognize our opportunity there. One of those that you might notice specifically around the holidays is the request for people to say happy holidays. And oftentimes that request is met with defensiveness instead of recognized as an invitation. And so that comes up, that same kind of request, defensive, unopened invitation happens around political correctness a lot of times. One of the things I find really funny about that conversation is that people that tend to be defensive about political correctness are usually sharing that they feel like maybe they don't know what they're supposed to say. However, political correctness is actually an invitation that tells you exactly how somebody else wants to be addressed. So it's a pretty simple invitation where someone says, this is how I would like you to address me, or this is how I would like you to talk to me, or discuss this topic. And that's an invitation for us to be vulnerable and see what that's all about. But a lot of times, because of our conditioning, we don't do that. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. And sometimes you'll hear in parenting circles a conversation around not forcing children to apologize. And of course, forcing anyone to do anything, that's a whole discussion about, oppression and cooperation right there. However, even little children often need a lot of support when they recognize they've done some sort of harm or something that's hurt somebody else. And so it takes a lot of careful listening to see how we can support them and their nervous systems, which is a big part of the work we do at the Whole Health Center, so that they have the capacity to apologize. And all of us adults have a lot more conditioning around what it means to take responsibility. Culturally speaking, we tend to have an environment that's much more based on like external accountability. And studies actually show that environments or organizations where external accountability is high, where that's the way that people are cultured and cultivated to be accountable, internal assumed accountability tends to be lower. I saw this with my own daughter in kindergarten. She went to kindergarten as a fairly accountable person. She could take care of herself. She did what was right because it was the thing that was right. And then they had one of those charts where you move the up and down the red light, green light chart. And there was a lot of rewards, external rewards for doing what the school wanted you to do correctly. And that was really confusing to her internal line of accountability, her internal assumed accountability. So nonprofit organizations and socially minded organizations actually tend to have a higher internal assumed accountability because they tend to focus less on that external line. And so organizations that are socially minded or nonprofits are helpful in changing the whole culture of a community because of that shift in perspective around accountability. So one of the things that I would love to do with you all is a little somatic practice before we see my actual presentation that will allow you to explore what it's felt like to experience harm or to experience conflict as on the receiving end as well as the giving end. You do not have to close your eyes at any point in this exercise, but you can if you want to. You don't actually have to do the exercise. You can just listen to me and kind of gather a bit about where I'm going with this. The benefit is that we're going to do a little bit of relaxation, and then our bodies are going to remember how we felt in certain situations. So that's why we're going to do this. However, as a little note, I'm going to ask you to remember things from your past that were maybe harmful or hurtful, as well as, when you were on the receiving end of harm. They don't have to be big things. Our bodies tend to respond the same way when we make a little mistake as when we make a big mistake. It's just sometimes a little more obvious when we make a big mistake. So since we're going to be focusing on our bodies, it's perfectly fine to remember some small injustice and to focus on those. You please don't open all of your doors right now. So I think that we'll do that right now. And then we'll move into the presentation that I have for you. So go ahead and first, stop looking at me on the screen and just look around the space that you are in, wherever you are. And look around and observe what the light is like, what's happening around you, and then start to feel in to where you are. So, feel what your feet are resting on, feel whatever surface it is that you are sitting on, the temperature of the room. And it's actually really helpful if you just kind of look all around and actually turn your body and let your body take a good look around at your situation. And then once you're comfortable and have looked around, if you want to, now's a great time to close your eyes and just focus on your natural breath. So, however your body is breathing, just make some observations. You don't need to change anything at all. Just make some observations. Notice your breath. Is it in your chest? Is it in your belly? Is it shallow? Is it deep? And now go ahead and change the breath by inhaling a little deeper and exhaling a little deeper. So now, as you continue to breathe, we're going to inhale to the count of 4, 3, 2, 1, and then exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. And inhale 4, 3, 2, 1, and exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. So continue to breathe in this way, in this rhythmic and slow pattern. And go ahead and scan your body from the top of your head all the way down to your toes. And just notice if there's any points of tension, if there's any points of tenderness. And as you're breathing, with every exhale, try and relax the body a little more deeply. So go ahead and feel the security of whatever surface is supporting you. Really feel the surface beneath you and recognize that it's rising up to meet you. And remember how you looked around your space. So you have the security of that space that you're in and the security of what supports you, supports your physical body. And continue to breathe slowly, feeling your breath in your body. And now I'm going to ask you to recall a time where someone hurt you or upset you and you tried to tell them. Maybe it's just something small, something that happened at work or at home, the grocery store. Maybe there's something bigger that comes to mind. And you tried to tell someone else why this wasn't working for you. So go ahead and on the next inhale, go ahead and scan your body as you slowly exhale and notice any sensations or any changes that have happened in your body or that happen in your body as you're thinking about that upset, as you're thinking of trying to tell someone something that hurts you. Where do you feel those changes? What parts of your body recognize that you have something to say? What did you want that person or people to know? How were you hoping they would respond? Again, noticing any changes and sensations in your body. Okay, return to your breath. Let your body relax again. So inhale And then remind your body of the security of the space you're in. Feel the surface that supports you. You're going to inhale 4, 3, 2, 1. And exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Now I'm going to ask you to recall a time when you knew or you hurt someone. So maybe they told you so, or maybe you just knew. What sensations do you feel in your body now? And where do you feel these sensations? As you think about that time when you hurt someone, how are these feelings different or the same as the feelings when you were hurt? And what did you want this person who you hurt to know? What did you want them to know then? And what would you want them to know now? So again, return to the breath, relaxing your body, feeling your supports. Inhale and exhale deeply. And now see if you can recall a moment of repair. Recall a moment of reconciliation. A time when there was a conflict or a misunderstanding that was resolved. A reconnecting. What do you feel in your body now? Where do you feel these sensations? As you recall that moment of repair and reconnecting, how is your breath? How are the muscles in your face? And what do you want that other person or people to know? Now go ahead and return to your breath. Some slow, deep inhales and exhales, again to the count of 4. Feel the security of the surfaces that support you and the space around you. Take one more nice deep breath. And then as you open your eyes, gently exhale. And go ahead and again, turn your head from side to side and look all around you. And then when you're ready, go ahead and return to the screen with me. So I hope that was not too difficult. And it was certainly a lot faster than we would normally do something like that. And thank you for participating with me, because what I'm about to share with you now is actually a pretty personal project that we did last semester in school in my forgiveness class. It was a class for cultivating a culture of forgiveness and reconciliation. And so our end of the semester project was to do a creative piece based on our own personal experiences with forgiveness, and then we were to essentially dissect ourselves in our piece with academic studies and peer-reviewed research and explain why we felt the way we did. My project actually, it was not just from the last semester. I have about 20 years of personal practice, 20 years of formal mindfulness and spirituality practice. And 5 years now of grad school studying this subject matter, and as well as my personal experiences. And so that's what I usually say. That's my role as a coach, is to share my personal lived experiences, and then lend my academic study, my professional practice, and my personal practice to my community so that you all can use it as serves you. And so this, what I'm about to share with you, is my experience with forgiveness and accountability. However, it's also a little bit of collective, because my experience is a collective experience. So especially given my role in my community, and my observations about how what's happening to us as individuals is a collective experience. So I guess the reason I'm sharing this with you specifically in this way, giving you this little intro, is that I don't want anybody to think that I think that this is everyone's experience with accountability or forgiveness. However, I do think there's value in sharing our own individual ones, and mine does come with a lot of self-reflection and study, and also the privilege of others who have shared their experience with me. So I'm going to share a little bit of both with that. So what I'm going to do is share with you the screen, and I'm going to take you to another page. And if someone can just let me know if they see here the unopened invitation and accountability story. So I'm going to hop on over here back. It says I'm sharing the screen, but I'm not really sure if you guys can see my screen. Anybody capable of letting me know while I'm sharing screen? Maybe you're not. All right, real quick, okay. I think there is a delay. Okay. Yes, you can see my screen. Awesome. All right. So I am going to now play this video for you. Just so you know, there's no sound. So I guess that might be a problem. Is anybody, okay, there's a delay of about 10 to 20 seconds. All right, so there's a delay when I say something and then, okay, that is good to know. So I'm gonna ask a question. Is there gonna be a problem with anybody viewing the video I'm gonna share if there's no sound? Since I don't really know what kind of experience you all are having on the other end, I just want to be sure that if I let you read what I'm about to share with you on the screen, if that's going to be a problem, or if people are going to be able to see it or read it. So now I'm going to wait a second because it looks like there's a delay, and see if anybody has any answers. Okay, I'm going to proceed with sharing my screen and the unopened invitation story. All right, so you all will need to read the screen in order to experience this creative project. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing that screen and I'm going to share.
Hi.
Hello?
This is an introduction to a series of therapeutic
Oh,
sessions
I have no
to
idea where
improve
that's coming
and manage
from.
specific conditions.
Oh,
We'll begin with
hold on.
sciatica and lower back
I see.
issues and follow with
That is a yoga teacher from our, I'm not sure if I was still sharing my screen with you all, but you may have heard that was a yoga teacher from the Whole Health Center. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again, and this time I'm going to share just my regular screen. All right. So this is a little bit of an explanation to, no, I don't know if that's going to work. Nope. All right, because we're using this platform and I'm just not really sure if you guys are going to be able to see when I share my whole screen, I'm just going to keep it this way. So what I'm going to share here is part of the essay that supported my exploration of my own feelings of forgiveness and my requests for accountability, and a little bit about how both I see this same issue in our personal individual relationships, as well as in our broader collective relationships. So conflict is an absolutely valuable opportunity to connect with each other if we accept the invitation. So most of us are pretty well aware that our dominant culture philosophy tends to be to avoid conflict. Politeness is pretty valuable in our dominant culture interactions, and that comes into our individual relationships as well, especially if our individual relationships and our individual, say, home culture really strongly mirrors the dominant culture philosophy. So most of us are pretty well equipped to avoid conflict. However, when we do that, we miss great opportunities to build intimacy and trust, because it's through the experiences that we have that aren't so great that even if our relationships are great, maybe there's conflict in our daily lives, right? When we experience those together, we build trust with each other. So if we're looking at those opportunities every time there's a conflict for how we can better connect with each other, we're building a culture of connection. And if we're looking for ways to avoid that, some of them you saw in that video are ones that have been told to me specifically. The agree to disagree, right? So this is the one that's come up a lot this year. The person that says, let's agree to disagree, gets to decide. They're the person in power to decide if the other person gets to express themselves or not, unless they don't agree to disagree. So ways that we can, establish better communication so that we give ourselves the capacity to deal with conflict. Those are a lot of the types of things that we do at the Whole Health Center, is like way before we get to that point, before we even start our social justice work, before we even start our equity work, before we start going into conflicts in our personal lives or conflicts within ourselves. What are we doing to support our nervous systems and our emotional and spiritual selves so that we have greater capacity to engage and build intimacy there? So it's through the practice of accepting vulnerability that we allow ourselves to feel our own hard feelings, which gives us the capacity to feel another's feelings. That is what empathy is, right? The ability to feel how someone else is feeling. However, one of the parts we leave out there is empathy is a genuine feeling in my body, my physical sensations of the feeling that you're having. So when we watch pictures of a very dramatic and traumatic situation, like a bombing where children are harmed, and you feel in your body what you see reflected from you in those other individuals, that's empathy. It's not just thinking how we feel that way, but the actual physical sensations. And it's through the building of our ability to feel our own empathetic expression as well as someone else's that we develop compassion. So compassion actually changes our brains. And when it does that, it spurs us into action. So once we've had that compassion activated in our brains, we are actually compelled to serve each other, compelled to alleviate whatever pain that other person is having. So if we are avoiding conflict and we're avoiding the opportunity to feel the empathy in our bodies for what another's feeling, we're also avoiding the ability to build compassion and build that capacity to act. And I think you guys can probably all like recall something where you have a lot of compassion, and you know, like if it's for your children or for another individual or maybe a social justice issue, and you know that like you just can't do nothing. That's because your brain has been activated by compassion, and it's going to be very, very difficult for you to sit on your hands and not act. So every individual has stories that they tell themselves and construct a narrative of their lives. And so when we accept the invitation for accountability, we're willing to explore the hurt and harm and consistently explore the truth of those stories. So that's really what vulnerability is. The ability to constantly be exploring the truth of those stories and possibly finding out that we are not who we think we are. But most of the time, in my experience, and it's going to be hard for you guys to see this slide, I think. Let me see. There we go. Most of the time in my experience with everyone I've worked with, we are who we think we are. It's just our fear of not being who we think we are prohibits us from allowing our hearts to really expand, and break open with, we are trying so hard to prevent that we often miss this, that in the end, most of the time we are. If we give in to that, if we give in to our hearts, we most of the time are who we hope we are. So this is one of the things that really, this line here that is a little bit darker is one of the awarenesses that I really took out of this last exploration into accountability. So when we accept our vulnerability, knowing that we will hurt and be hurt, we are always looking around for opportunities to alleviate suffering rather than avoid suffering. So when we give in and we accept our vulnerability, and we accept that we are both going to be hurt by others around us. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen? Okay. Well, it's a little delayed, but I don't think I need to be sharing it at this point. I guess you guys have probably just been seeing me reading. So you guys don't need to see this. It's fine. I'll just read for you the last little bit because I want to make sure there's time for questions. So when we accept our vulnerability, knowing we will hurt and be hurt, we are always looking for opportunities to alleviate suffering, which means we're always engaging those questions of truth. We're always asking ourselves, and it sounds like a lot of work, but it is so much less work than the opposite, which is trying to avoid harm and trying to when we try to avoid harm, we are trying to avoid being harmed, as well as the experience of harming others, because what do we know from trying to apologize? It hurts. So if we just accept that we are all going to be like tender mess, then we can go around trying to figure out how to alleviate that for each of us, instead of trying to always be perfect and never cross that line, which we know we're going to do. And therefore, our bodies are always tense and expecting that. So our bodies are always, our nervous system is always generating, our nervous system knows the truth of what we really think when our brain sometimes has trouble articulating it. So if we make this simple shift, recognizing our vulnerability and allowing ourselves to be more accountable, our bodies relax, because our bodies are actually trying to build connection with each other. That's what they're trying to do all the time. And we're really very preventative when we are not accepting of our vulnerability. So this last statement that I'm going to read to you is actually from the Whole Health Center and our program, Evolution's Edge. Our evolution has already provided us with the hardware that we need for a more integrated and harmonious level of functioning, and for wider and more inclusive patterns of seeing. It is now our responsibility and inherent duty to humanity and the earth to continuously develop the next steps together. We will only collectively evolve as we each ourselves evolve and become models of a new way of being. So there is so much to talk about related to all of these concepts that honestly the most stressful part of putting this presentation together for you all was trying to decide what to give you for our discussion. But I've also I created a packet that has a lot of resources that are both for your individual exploration as well as for community exploration, with some resources. And in that packet, along with the resources, is a self-assessment, an accountability self-assessment, which lets you look at some of the behaviors that you engage with related to conflict. And you can find it in the chat. And also gives some suggestions of ways that you can further develop your internal assumed accountability. Because no matter where we are on that spectrum of accountability, if we stop cultivating it, then we slip backwards. So we have to always be investigating that truth. My husband recently was feeling a lot of upset and asked me, what was wrong? And I was like, nothing, you feel good. And he's like, what? I don't feel good. And I was like, no, but you're feeling well. And you're letting yourself feel all of those feelings, which is uncomfortable, but it's actually way more better. You're feeling better. And when we feel our feelings better, we can make better choices about our actions. So we can't ever stop doing that. It's just a lifelong work for all of us. Hopefully, though, part of what we're doing here today is cultivating a culture which creates a framework so that we don't all have to cognitively be doing so much of the work ourselves in every moment, so that we can create a culture where we can drop in and we can use our culture as a guidebook for ways to be well in the world, instead of having to question it all of the time in every moment. We should always question a little, but right now we're at a place where we're suddenly experiencing a lot of awareness of what needs to change. And that's making us question in each and every moment, which is a lot of work. It's very tedious. So I was wondering, for the last little bit, it would be great if maybe you all have some questions, or maybe there's something specific that I mentioned that you want a little bit more information on. Maybe there's some place in your life that you're looking to cultivate better conversations, or initiate the opening of those invitations. Maybe you have some questions about some of. I know it's very complicated when we see certain questions being brought up about accountability. It's really complicated because the whole framework that we're using to decide whether or not the new lessons are equitable is based on our old framework of knowledge. So sometimes we really have to sort through all these little pieces and look at each individual request and figure out what's going on. So it's often confusing. So does anybody have any specific questions or concerns, or, I'm going to just be quiet for a minute and let what I've said finish getting to you, and then give you a chance to type any messages that you might have for me. I wish we were all together, at least face to face. I'll take a sip of water too. And then you guys can just let it all settle and see if maybe there's some thoughts. So I can also ask us some questions that kind of prompt more questions, if that might be better. But I'm just going to go slow because I don't want to miss, with the delay, I don't want to miss if someone has some specific things that they want to talk about. Okay, so I guess what we could do is I can ask you if you would like to talk more about ways to express requests for connection, or requests for accountability. If you'd like to like me to talk a little bit more about ways to express those requests. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do. I feel like I'm going to see you all someday, and then I won't know that I've already met you. But hopefully, I'll meet you in some of these other sessions or the networking groups. So I can talk about that, the requests, or I can talk about the reception of requests. Does anybody have any interest in talking about either one of those specifically? Because I know that our requests for accountability don't always sound like invitations. Because, generally, the point that we get to that, it's kind of complicated. So I can talk about that a little bit from either direction. But it'd be great if anybody has any specific direction that they'd like me to take with that. Okay. So I'm just going to use kind of an example that I saw on social media lately that I think is pretty relatable. So I'm also a yoga teacher, and in the yoga community, recently there was someone who was doing a podcast, and on the podcast they and I don't know all of the details of the situation because we're just going to talk specifically about the requests for accountability. That's the part that we're interested in. So in the middle of this podcast, they decided they were going to talk about gender, and they were going to talk about trans inclusion in yoga spaces, and there was a whole big discussion about this, and they didn't invite anybody to that conversation that was anything other than cis heterosexual, and they didn't invite anybody in that conversation. And apparently several of the things that were said, again, I didn't listen to the podcast, don't need to, because this is just about the invitation that was offered. They said some things that hurt the feelings of a great deal of people that were listening to them. And it was brought to the attention of more people because people love other people. And it became a conversation around why this wasn't okay. Now, a group of people that had listened and recognized harm was done reached out to the podcaster specifically, and then also shared several of the phrases that were harmful on social media, and there was a big discussion about it. And they specifically came up with a list of requests that said, this is what we'd like you to do to fix the harm that was done. And that's a pretty specific request, right? So initially, the person didn't realize that they'd caused harm. They were not going out there to do their podcast on purpose to make people upset. And that's a position that a lot of us end up in. We didn't realize that we were doing something that was harmful. And it's come up a lot with the last couple of years, right? Especially with the pandemic, where suddenly we're like, oh no, if I do this, it'll hurt someone. So this person didn't know that they were being hurtful or that they were harming, but it was brought to their attention. And not only was it brought to their attention that they harmed someone, they were actually given a specific list of ways that they could make amends. But instead, they used those phrases that came up in that project I showed you. Things like, that's not what I meant, or I'm sorry, right? I'm sorry that you feel this way. And in the end, there was no resolution. The podcaster never made an appropriate apology, and the group of yoga teachers that had that were making the request for accountability went unheard by the person who had harmed them. However, there was a lot of discussion in the community, right? Where they could sort those things out. And one of the things that we're seeing socially right now, and that you can probably remember from your own personal experiences when you have experienced harm and you try to tell someone else, is that we don't have a lot of experience on how reconciliation happens or how great it feels when we fix harm. But mostly, I spoke to one of the teachers that was involved in making the invitation. And, you know, oftentimes when we're in that position, we don't know that we're requesting connection either, right? Because once we're hurt, we get defensive. So then the way that we request invitation, we request accountability, is it sometimes feels really angry or like scary to the person that you're requesting from. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. However, in this instance, they actually had used their skill as yoga teachers to make sure that they were being slow and quiet and gave the specifics, and it still wasn't received. So part of our vulnerability that we're experiencing and that we're working with when we make requests for accountability is that we aren't going to be heard. And we sort of have to relinquish control over that. However, when we can clarify what our needs are, even when they're not met, it feels a lot better in our bodies and opens up the space for us to find new solutions. So one of the things that we talked about a lot in the forgiveness class, and that I talked about in my project, was that forgiveness really alchemizes us and inside spiritually. And that's not to say that it makes things go away, it makes the hurt go away, or it makes harm disappear, because we're going to carry that stuff with us. But when we work with it, and we work with vulnerability, and we work with accountability, we create a deeper capacity for us to navigate these issues. And we also develop a deeper capacity to handle it when our voice isn't heard. navigate around that barrier. So, if you're not heard and it's a personal issue, then we get to decide on a personal level whether we want to like continue to have a relationship with this person, right? But most of the time we do, otherwise we wouldn't have made the request. If we didn't want to maintain relationship with someone that hurt us, we wouldn't request their accountability. We wouldn't request that they hear how they harmed us. We don't have to have any engagement with that person or those people. And so if we multiply that on a collective level, whether we like it or not, whether we wish it were so or not, we are always in relationship with each other in our collective. So Paul has a mantra of remembrance, which is, there's 12 mantras of remembrance, and one of them is persist as love despite all evidence to the contrary. And it is my favorite, and it's one of Paul's favorites too. It's like one of the big messages from the Whole Health Center. If you keep digging under all of these conflicts that we have as individuals or as the world, underneath of all of that stuff is just people trying to love each other. Even the most horrible, hateful atrocities that we experience, if we keep digging, we find there's still people trying to connect with each other. And sometimes it ends up being a lot of evidence to the contrary, because our behaviors get cultivated in such a way that our love comes out as hatefulness. To express on a really micro level how this works, my sister sent me a shirt recently, like a picture of one that said, I drink coffee, I know things, and I hate people. It's what I do. And and I told my daughter, I was like, luckily I can translate for her that I hate people is I love people so much that they're constantly frustrating me, right? So that's a micro version of how that happens when we get so frustrated. But the really macro version that we see is war. When we're in those situations and we keep digging and we keep digging and we keep digging, in the end, there's a bunch of people that have some sort of conflict and some sort of wound. And so what invitations, when we shift our thinking to be looking for, to use positive regard, even in the hardest of situations, to be looking for what connection, what love, what expression is coming from people, then that shifts our entire view of the situation. So instead of looking for ways to defend ourselves and ways to defend each other and ways to prevent harm, which we know isn't going to happen, we can be looking for ways to foster love and ways to foster connection. And when we're fostering connection, then we're using that opportunity to build intimacy and to build trust. And in those moments, we're going to have a real, opportunity for that whole heartbreaking open thing, which hurts, but it hurts so much better than the rigid hearts that are fighting with one another. When, again, why would we be talking to each other at all, right? We don't have to do that. So even if it's fighting over land or all of these things, they're all on the surface and we just have to keep going down and under. And that's going to take forever, right? That's a full-time forever work. However, we're here today to figure out, to find ways that we can, again, shift culture and our culture in our little places so that we can be, letting that grow and facilitating the nervous systems and the cultural nervous system, so that when a conflict arises, everybody doesn't get all worked up, right? So that when a conflict arises, everybody pulls in to see how they can alleviate the suffering. And if that was happening, it'd be way different. So I think we're really close to the end. Does anybody have a quick question?
I haven't received any questions, but I just wanted to pause and thank you myself for really powering through in unfamiliar circumstances with all of this technology. I really personally gained a lot out of what you had to share today. It was really interesting to me because, you know, we've been thinking about and talking about in our organization call out culture recently, and this is a really different way. The way you've presented this has me thinking about it really differently in terms of it being about self and ownership of your own learning and growth. I'm looking forward to continuing to reflect on this going forward and to go back and do the assessment in the packet that you put together for everyone. And I do hope that you continue to share all of this in the world and get people thinking and talking about it, because it's really, really needed and really appreciated.
It's a really exciting that we're all here and more excited to do this work. I see there is one question there. Is it going to give me a second?
Yes, I will not stop until you are done.
Okay. So it says, what if the invitation is just not acknowledged or received? What can we do? The wholeness of that project that I put together was my invitations not being acknowledged or received. So that none of them have been that I've used in that work. So that was why I chose those topics. And what we can do is, again, our own work around building our capacity to handle that. And when we build that capacity, we open our eyes to ways to shift around barriers. And a lot of the times, the lack of acknowledgement is coming from other people that haven't done all that internal process themselves. So like, my grandpa doesn't want to hear my stories of ways that the things that he's said about politics have harmed me, right? That's going to hurt him. So I have to do that work on my own, and I can find ways around whatever harm he has created for us, both in our personal lives, but also in the greater collective, because I can take those experiences out there. One of the things we found, though, is that getting his nervous system all worked up about why he hurt me by saying whatever he said, right? I'm certainly not getting anywhere with that. So I think there's a little bit more information about that in the packet, and there's a bunch of resources, both books and podcasts and all sorts of things that should lead to more answers about what to do when your invitation is not acknowledged, because that's the big question. And there's complicated answers, but they all fit together into doing that. All right.
Great.
I'm gonna say goodbye. I will see you all somewhere soon. Thank you.